She was the woman everyone overlooked. Emily Carter, quiet, plain, walking the halls of a powerful Boston tech company with worn shoes and secondhand clothes. Every day, she carried files, fixed mistakes, and kept her head down, while laughter followed her like a shadow. They called her names. They mocked her silence. To them, she was invisible. But what happens when the invisible woman becomes the center of the storm? One morning, in a crowded boardroom, the billionaire CEO rose from his chair. He looked across the room, at the woman no one defended, and said 4 words that silenced the laughter. "She's my girl." From that moment, everything changed. The whispers turned into rumors. The rumors became headlines. A single photo, twisted online, threatened to destroy her life. Yet, in the chaos, Emily discovered something she never expected, not just the protection of a powerful man, but the power of her own voice. Will she break under the weight of cruelty, or will she rise higher than anyone imagined? Stay with us. Because this is more than a story about bullying or betrayal. It's about dignity, courage, and the moment a quiet woman refuses to be invisible. If this story moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The laughter came first, not soft, not kind, sharp, metallic, echoing against the glass walls of the conference room like nails on a chalkboard. Emily Carter pretended not to hear it. She always did. Her hands tightened around the stack of reports she had just printed, the rough paper cutting into her palms. She lowered her eyes to the carpet plain gray, the kind you could find in every office across the country. For Emily, it had become her safest horizon. If she kept her gaze low enough, maybe she could vanish into it. A voice floated from behind her. "She's wearing that again." Another voice joined in. Guess Goodwill was having a sale. Laughter again, a ripple, then a wave. Emily's cheeks burned, but she kept walking toward the meeting room. She didn't speak, didn't protest. At 32 years old, she had learned the cruel arithmetic of silence. The less you said, the less ammunition you gave them. She pushed the door open as quietly as she could. The room was already full. Executives in tailored suits, assistants with sleek hair, interns tapping on phones. Not one pair of eyes softened when they landed on her. "Late again," sneered Victoria Hayes, the head of marketing, dressed in scarlet heels sharp enough to cut glass. Emily glanced at the clock. She wasn't late. She never was. But arguing would only feed the wolves. She muttered sorry and slipped into the farthest chair, the one near the corner, half hidden behind a potted plant. It had always been this way. Invisible when it was convenient, too visible when it was cruel. She had become the office shadow, the secretary no one defended, the woman people mocked in whispers, loud enough to be heard. For a moment, the room buzzed with the ordinary chaos of a corporate morning. Coffee cups clicked against the table, keyboards tapped, but then, silence, not gradual, not polite, sudden, as if someone had cut the sound with a blade. The glass doors opened, and he walked in, Jonathan Reed, the CEO, the man who had turned a struggling Boston tech firm into a billion-dollar empire, tall, broad-shouldered, with an expression unreadable enough to make seasoned executives nervous. His tailored navy suit seemed almost unnecessary. He could have worn jeans and a t-shirt, and still, the air would bend around him. Rumors swirled about Jonathan Reed. Some called him a genius, others a recluse. Some whispered he was ruthless. But everyone agreed on one thing when he entered a room. The atmosphere shifted. Emily had seen him before, of course crossing the lobby, stepping into elevators, once or twice in the cafeteria line. But she had never spoken to him, not beyond polite greetings. To her, he was a figure from a different universe, untouchable, distant, far beyond her world of paper cuts and staplers. Yet today, when his eyes swept across the room, they didn't stop on Victoria Hayes with her perfect lipstick. They didn't pause on the CFO adjusting his Rolex. They stopped on Emily Carter. Her breath caught. She looked down instantly, panicked. Did she spill coffee on her blouse? Was her skirt wrinkled, Her glasses crooked, she forced herself to stare at the report in her hands, heart pounding. Jonathan moved to the head of the table. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that silenced even the whispers. As many of you know, we closed the partnership deal with Nexora this week. A big win for all of us. A murmur of approval, nodding heads. But, he continued, voice sharpening, that's not why I called this meeting. The room shifted, phones were lowered. Even Victoria straightened in her chair. I've walked these halls, Jonathan said slowly. I've heard things. Laughter at the expense of others. Judgments made on appearance instead of performance. Cruelty disguised as humor. A few executives glanced at each other uneasily. That ends today. Emily's chest tightened. Was he talking about her? Jonathan's eyes moved deliberately, scanning the room, letting the words sink in. Then, without hesitation, he walked toward the back corner, toward her. Emily froze. Her first instinct was to shrink, to disappear into the chair, but he stopped right beside her. The air seemed to thicken. Victoria gave a nervous laugh. Oh, come on. No one here is really bullying anyone, Jonathan ignored her. He placed one hand gently on the back of Emily's chair. This woman, he said clearly, his voice ringing against the glass walls, is one of the hardest working people in this building. She stays late. She fixes your mistakes. She keeps this place running when no one notices. Silence, shuffling in seats, the discomfort of guilt spreading like ink in water. And from now on, Jonathan's voice dropped lower, more intimate. She will be noticed. Emily blinked, trying to understand what was happening. Her ears rang, her palms sweated. She wanted to vanish, but at the same time, she had never felt so seen. Then Jonathan looked down at her, not with pity, but with something steadier, firmer, protective. She's not your joke, he said, his words sharp as a gavel. She's my girl. Gasps. A cough. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's mouth fell open. The CFO scratched his jaw. Awkward. Emily sat frozen, every nerve on fire. Did he really just say that? In front of everyone, Jonathan straightened, adjusted his cuffs. Meeting adjourned. Chairs creaked, papers rustled. But no one moved immediately. No one wanted to be the first to stand, except Jonathan Reed. He extended a hand toward Emily. Her fingers trembled as she placed hers in his. And just like that, with a simple gesture, the entire balance of her world shifted. The alarm rang at 5:30 a.m., long before the sun touched the rooftops of Boston. Emily Carter didn't need it. She was already awake. Most nights, sleep came in fragments an hour here. 2 hours there, her mind too restless, too full of echoes from the day before. The alarm wasn't so much a wake-up call as it was a reminder that another day had arrived. Whether she was ready or not, she moved quietly through her small apartment, a one-bedroom on the edge of Dorchester. The floors creaked, the radiator hissed, and the fridge hummed like an old machine that had seen better years. But it was hers. The little place had become both her shelter and her cage. Breakfast was always the same, a piece of whole wheat toast, scrambled eggs with just a sprinkle of salt, and a banana if they were still fresh from the grocery store. She brewed coffee in a dented percolator her mother had given her a decade ago. The smell filled the apartment, warm and comforting, though the taste was always a little bitter no matter how much sugar she added. She poured the coffee into her thermos, a scratched silver one she'd carried since college. It had a small dent on the side from when she dropped it on icy pavement years ago. She had considered replacing it more than once, but something about its reliability gave her comfort. Unlike people, this thermos never betrayed her. In front of the bathroom mirror, Emily pulled her hair into a practical bun. Stray strands always slipped out, soft brown wisps framing her face in ways she never quite controlled. She reached for her glasses' thick frames, slightly crooked from being bent too many times. They slid down her nose if she didn't push them back every half hour. Her wardrobe was predictable, button-down blouses faded from too many washes, slacks that didn't quite fit, and cardigans with fraying sleeves. She owned 2 pairs of shoes suitable for work, Both had worn soles. The leather cracked near the toes. She polished them when she could, but no amount of polish could hide years of wear. Some women dressed for attention. Emily dressed to disappear. She left her apartment at 6:15 sharp. The city was just waking delivery trucks groaning along the streets. A few dog walkers bundled in coats. The faint smell of bagels drifting from the corner bakery. Emily clutched her thermos close, walked briskly to the bus stop, and took her usual seat near the window. The ride into downtown was quiet, except for the hum of the engine and the occasional conversation between strangers. Emily preferred it that way. She watched the skyline grow taller as the bus crossed the bridge. The glass towers looked cold, unreachable, like fortresses of success built for other people. At the office, she was always one of the first to arrive. By 7:00 a.m., she sat at her desk outside the executive wing, arranging papers, answering overnight emails, making sure the coffee machine was stocked. She knew the little details mattered, even if no one else noticed, especially because no one else noticed. Her desk was tidy, almost painfully so. A small plant leaned toward the light, a gift she had given herself after one particularly cruel day. Beside it sat a framed photo of her parents, taken years ago on Cape Cod. They had both passed now, and sometimes Emily touched the glass, as if their steady smiles could carry her through another day. She had trained herself to be small, her footsteps quiet in the hallway. Her voice lowered in meetings, her presence carefully tucked into corners. Being invisible was safer than giving them something to attack. And yet, every morning, as she tied her shoes or buttoned her cardigan, a voice whispered inside her chest, "Maybe today someone will see you. Maybe today will be different." It was a dangerous hope. She knew that. Hope was fragile, and fragile things broke easily. But it clung to her anyway, no matter how many times reality proved otherwise. At her desk, Emily typed steadily, fingers gliding over the keyboard. She had mastered efficiency. She knew who needed reminders before they asked, which executive liked their reports double-spaced, which intern would forget to submit numbers unless she checked twice. She made herself useful in the way only invisible people can by fixing problems no one else wanted to admit existed. But usefulness was not the same as belonging. Sometimes, when the office grew noisy with laughter and chatter, she would pause and look at them, the colleagues who wore bright dresses, who shared inside jokes, who went out for drinks after work. She longed for it, for the simple comfort of being included. But almost as quickly as the longing came, so did the fear, because to be noticed meant to be judged. To be judged meant to be hurt, and Emily had been hurt enough. So she returned to her work, kept her head down, and told herself invisibility was a kind of armor, even if, deep down, it felt more like a prison. Reed Technologies sat in the heart of downtown Boston, a glass and steel monument that caught the morning sun like a mirror. To outsiders, it looked like the future sleek, modern, alive with the rhythm of success. Inside, marble floors gleamed, elevators whispered open with quiet efficiency, and the lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee. For Emily Carter, the building felt less like a workplace and more like a stage where she was always the unwanted extra, visible enough to be mocked, invisible enough to be forgotten. By 8:30 the executive floor came alive. The halls echoed with the sharp clack of designer heels, the low murmur of conversations about quarterly goals, and the laughter of people who seemed to glide effortlessly through the corporate world. Men wore tailored suits, crisp and flawless. Women carried handbags that cost more than Emily's monthly rent. Their hair caught the light just right. Their perfumes lingered in the air like signatures. And then there was Emily, at her modest desk, dressed in clothes that spoke of practicality rather than style. Her shoes tapped softly on the polished floor, the sounds swallowed quickly, as if even noise didn't want to linger around her. She kept her head down, answering emails, sorting files, but the voices found her anyway. Emily, that cardigan again. One of the younger analysts smirked as he passed her desk. "You must have a whole closet of beige." Another voice chimed in from across the hall. "I swear, if she walks any quieter, she'll just disappear into the carpet." Laughter rippled, bouncing from cubicle to cubicle until it landed squarely in Emily's chest. She forced her fingers to keep typing. The keys clacked evenly, a rhythm she clung to like a lifeline. But the ringleader of it all was Victoria Hayes, head of marketing. Confident, polished, sharp-tongued. If Reed Technologies was a high school, Victoria was the prom queen who never grew out of the role. She carried herself like every room belonged to her, and for the most part, it did. "Emily." Victoria called one morning, her voice lilting like a bell but edged with steel. "Be a dear and fetch me a coffee? Would you? 3 sugars, oat milk. Oh, and try not to trip on the way. Those shoes of yours look like they've seen better decades." The group around her laughed, not loudly, but enough to sting. Emily stood, legs stiff, and made her way to the break room. Each step felt heavier than the last. The office air, usually cool and filtered, seemed to thicken around her, pressing against her chest. The break room itself was no refuge. 2 interns were whispering near the counter, and when Emily reached for the sugar packets, one of them said under her breath, "Can you imagine him, Mr. Reed, ever noticing her? Not unless it was some kind of pity project." They snickered. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she stirred the coffee. She told herself the words didn't matter, that they were just air, noise, nothing more. But her heart knew better. Words cut, and these words carved deep, leaving bruises no one could see. When she returned to Victoria's office, the woman took the coffee without looking up from her screen. Finally, she said, dismissive, "You know, Carter, efficiency is part of the job description." Emily wanted to respond, to defend herself, to point out that she was the one who often stayed late fixing the very mistakes Victoria's team made. But the words caught in her throat, heavy as stone. Speaking up would only invite more laughter. So she nodded, placed the cup gently on the desk, and left. Back at her own corner, Emily sat down and took a slow breath. The walls of the office felt closer than usual, as if shrinking around her. The hum of printers, the click of keyboards, the constant chatter it all pressed in, suffocating. She imagined for a moment what it might feel like to belong here, to laugh freely without being the target, to wear clothes that didn't mark her as different, to have someone notice not her shoes, not her glasses, but her effort. Instead, she kept her eyes on her screen, her fingers moving with quiet precision. If invisibility was armor, she would wear it until it cracked. Still, somewhere deep inside, a fragile hope flickered, a hope she tried to smother, because hope was dangerous in places like this. Hope made you believe someone might see you. Hope made the laughter hurt even more. And yet, she couldn't quite let it go. Jonathan Reed wasn't the kind of man who needed an introduction. Even before his name was spoken in a room, people felt his presence. At 42, he carried the weight of both genius and authority. He had started as an engineer, building software in a cramped apartment with nothing more than a second-hand computer and stubborn determination. Those who knew him then said he was relentless, a man who could spend 16 hours debugging a single line of code and still rise the next morning with ideas that kept pushing boundaries. Now, decades later, he was no longer the quiet engineer behind a screen. He was the CEO of Reed Technologies, a company that had grown from a risky startup into a billion-dollar empire. His face appeared in magazines, his quotes were shared on leadership blogs, and his decisions made headlines in business journals. But to the employees inside the glass tower in Boston, Jonathan Reed was something more intimate, more immediate in aura that could silence a room with a single glance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with features carved in sharp lines that seemed to resist softness. His suits were always tailored, though never flashy. He wore them the way one might wear armor, practical, protective, efficient. The only indulgence he allowed himself was a watch, a silver Omega that had once belonged to his father. Yet, It wasn't his appearance that commanded attention. It was the way he carried himself, quiet, deliberate, every movement intentional. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. His eyes, a piercing gray blue, had a way of stilling the air. One look could turn chatter into silence, bravado into nervous coughs. Jonathan Reed was not cruel, but he was uncompromising. In the world of technology, compromise often meant mediocrity, and mediocrity was something he had no patience for. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, he stepped onto the executive floor. Conversations faltered, then resumed at a lower volume, careful and measured. Interns straightened in their seats. Managers pretended to be busier than they were. Even Victoria Hayes, usually so bold, softened her tone when she spotted him walking past. Jonathan didn't acknowledge the shift. He never did. He walked with a purposeful calm, nodding only when necessary, his thoughts often elsewhere on contracts, on strategies, on the future. But that morning, his eyes paused. Emily Carter was at her desk, as she always was, her hair tied back, glasses sliding down her nose, her fingers moving across the keyboard with quiet efficiency. A half-empty thermos stood beside her, the steam long gone cold. Papers were stacked neatly in front of her, color-coded tabs marking places that most people would never bother to organize. She didn't see him watching. She rarely looked up when people passed, preferring to blend into the background. Jonathan noticed what others didn't. He noticed that she was often the first one in and the last one out. He noticed that reports arrived on his desk polished, even when he knew they had passed through careless hands before reaching her. He noticed that she took on the forgotten tasks refilling the conference room, correcting typos in investor decks, fixing schedules when executives failed to communicate. None of it was glamorous, none of it earned praise, but the building functioned because of people like her, people who worked without spotlight, without applause, people who carried weight without ever being acknowledged. Jonathan respected that. It wasn't pity. He didn't believe in pity. To him, pity was condescending, a way of keeping someone small. What he felt was recognition. Recognition of someone who, like him years ago, worked quietly while others overlooked them. He slowed his stride for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Emily to sense his presence. She glanced up, startled, then quickly looked down again, cheeks flushing as though she had done something wrong. Jonathan didn't speak. He didn't need to, not yet. He simply moved on, entering his office with the same calm authority as always. But that flicker of awareness lingered. In the hours that followed, he found his thoughts returning to her desk. He wondered how many times she had been the butt of jokes he overheard in passing. He remembered once, late at night, walking past the office and seeing her bent over a stack of papers, the only light in the building glowing from her corner. She hadn't seen him then either. She never looked up. Jonathan had built his empire on noticing details others ignored. That same instinct now made him notice Emily Carter. And though he hadn't said a word, though she had no reason to suspect, the foundation of something unusual had already been laid. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter. Recognition. Respect. A thread invisible to others, but real. Strong enough to tug at him each time their paths crossed. Jonathan Reed had seen her, and for a woman who had lived so long in the shadows, that single act of being noticed would change everything. The quarterly strategy meeting was always a spectacle. Executives from every department gathered around the long mahogany table, laptops open, coffee cups lined like soldiers in formation. The walls of glass reflected the city skyline, tall and proud, as if to remind everyone inside that success had no patience for weakness. Emily Carter slipped into her usual spot, the corner chair, slightly tucked away, where the plant half blocked her from view. She liked it there. It was safe, or at least, it used to be. As the room filled, voices rose in laughter and chatter, but Emily knew too well that laughter was rarely harmless. "Look at that blouse again," someone whispered, just loud enough. "She must own stock in thrift stores." Another replied, earning a chuckle from the interns, "Honestly, I don't know why she even bothers showing up to these meetings." Emily tightened her grip on her notepad. The paper edges cut faintly into her skin, a small pain to ground her against the heavier one swelling in her chest. She lowered her eyes, willing herself to be invisible. Then came Victoria Hayes. She strode into the room like she owned it, her red heels striking the floor in sharp rhythm. She slid into her seat near the center, flashing a smile as flawless as the diamond on her finger. "Emily," she said sweetly, too sweetly, "be sure to take detailed notes. Won't you? We wouldn't want you to fall behind. Again." The table rippled with quiet laughter. Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. Fighting back only fed the fire. She bowed her head and scribbled something meaningless in the margin of her pad. But then the air shifted, the glass doors opened, and Jonathan Reed entered. Silence fell as if commanded. Conversations died mid-sentence. Fingers paused mid-typing. He walked with the same deliberate calm as always. But to Emily, it felt different this time. His presence didn't just silence the room, it pulled it taut, like a string about to snap. He reached the head of the table and set down a slim folder. His eyes scanned the room once, steady, controlled. "As many of you know," he began, "the Nexora deal closed last week, a milestone for this company." Polite applause, a few nods. Victoria smiled too brightly. Jonathan raised a hand, quieting the room again. But that's not the purpose of today's meeting. Brows furrowed, laptops were set aside. The air thickened. "I've walked these halls," Jonathan continued, his voice even but edged with something colder. "I've heard things. Laughter at the expense of others, cruelty masked as humor, judgments made on appearance instead of ability." A hush swept across the room. Eyes darted. Some executives shifted in their seats. Jonathan paused. Then, deliberately, he stepped away from the head of the table. His polished shoes echoed against the floor as he moved closer, closer until he reached the back corner, until he stood beside Emily Carter. Her breath caught. Heat flushed her face. Every instinct screamed at her to shrink smaller, to disappear entirely. She gripped her pen so tightly it nearly snapped. Victoria let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, come on, Jonathan. No one here is actually bullying anyone. We all know that." Jonathan didn't even glance her way. His hand rested lightly on the back of Emily's chair. "This woman," he said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension, "is one of the hardest working people in this building. She stays late. She fixes mistakes that aren't hers. She carries more weight than anyone realizes." The silence grew heavier. No one dared to move. And from this moment forward, he continued, lowering his tone just enough to make the words feel intimate, inescapable. "She will no longer be overlooked." Emily's ears rang. Her chest tightened. She wanted to believe she had misheard. But then Jonathan's gaze locked with hers. Steady. Certain. "She's not your joke," he said, sharp and final. "She's my girl." The words struck like thunder. Gasps rippled across the table. Someone coughed. Another dropped a pen. Even the unshakable CFO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Victoria's jaw literally dropped. She scrambled for words, but none came. Emily sat frozen. Her mind spun so fast it couldn't keep up. Did he just claim her, not as property, but as someone worth protecting, someone worth defending in front of everyone who had laughed at her? Her hands trembled in her lap. The notepad slipped slightly, sliding onto the floor with a soft thud. Jonathan straightened his cuffs. Meeting adjourned. For a beat, no one moved. The shock held them captive. Then, slowly, chairs scraped back, murmurs began. The air buzzed, heavy with disbelief. But Jonathan Reed didn't linger. He turned to Emily, extended his hand. Her body acted before her mind could resist. She placed her trembling hand in his. The warmth of his grip contrasted with the cold disbelief surrounding them. And in that instant, Emily Carter's world shattered and reassembled itself. No longer invisible, no longer just a shadow in the corner. She was seen. And though part of her wanted to vanish, to escape the sudden blaze of attention. Another part, the part she had buried for years, felt the faintest spark of something else. Hope. Rumors travel faster than truth. By the time Emily Carter returned to her desk that morning, the echo of Jonathan Reed's words, "She's my girl," had already multiplied, twisted, and grown claws. At first, it was whispers in the hallway, half-finished sentences cut off when she passed, laughter that died too quickly, replaced by the sound of phones being set down, screens being locked. Then it spread through email threads, disguised as jokes, subject lines that seemed harmless, Friday lunch or client update. But when opened, buried inside were comments meant to sting. "Did you hear what the boss said? Guess we know how she got the job. Wonder what she's really doing after hours." Anonymous messages appeared in inboxes. Too snide remarks forwarded around the office. Nobody signed their names. Nobody needed to. The cruelty had a signature of its own. By lunchtime, the air on the executive floor had changed. Emily felt it immediately. When she walked into the break room, conversation stopped. The interns at the counter exchanged glances, their laughter choking back into silence. A designer suddenly remembered she had a meeting. A financial analyst coughed and buried his face in his phone. Emily poured herself hot water for tea, her hands trembling so slightly she prayed no one noticed. She stirred the tea bag slowly, staring into the rising steam as though it might hide her. Behind her, a whisper slipped out, not as soft as it was meant to be. "She's his girl, all right, just not in the way he made it sound." Snickers followed. Emily's heart dropped. The room felt smaller, tighter, the walls pressing in on her. She set down her mug before she dropped it. Without a word, she walked out, her heels clicking too loudly against the tile floor. Back at her desk, she tried to focus on spreadsheets, but the numbers blurred, her inbox pinged with new emails, none of which she wanted to open. Every sound in the office seemed magnified, the hum of the printer, the buzz of someone's phone, the click of a pen. She felt exposed, as if a spotlight had been fixed on her from the moment Jonathan had spoken her name. "They're all watching me now," she thought, "not because of what I've done, but because of what they think I've done." The cruelest part wasn't the words themselves. It was the shift. Before, she had been invisible. Now, she was hyper-visible, dissected, speculated about, made into a story she had no control over. She had become everyone's favorite headline in a building that prided itself on discretion. She longed for invisibility again, for the safety of being ignored. But that safety was gone, and she wasn't sure it would ever return. That afternoon, while Emily was reloading the copier, she overheard Victoria Hayes in the corridor. Victoria didn't lower her voice. She never did when she wanted to be heard. "Honestly, I'm not surprised," she said, heels clicking in rhythm with her words. "He probably feels sorry for her. Maybe it's some kind of project. You know, turn the office wallflower into a pet. Or maybe," she paused dramatically, "maybe she finally realized the fastest way up the ladder isn't through hard work." Laughter followed, sharp, cruel, approving. Emily stood frozen, the copy machine whirring beside her. She pressed her palms flat against the cool metal, steadying herself. She wanted to run, to escape, to disappear. But where could she go? The office wasn't safe anymore. The hallways weren't safe. Even the restroom stalls, her old refuge, now echoed with muffled giggles and comments when she hid inside. Everywhere she went, the air carried the same question. Was she really sleeping with him? At her desk, she lowered her eyes, focusing on the small plant that leaned toward the light. Its leaves trembled slightly in the draft from the air vent. She envied it silent, steady, unnoticed. Her thoughts spiraled. Maybe they're right. Maybe he only said that because he felt sorry for me. Maybe it wasn't respect. Maybe it was pity, dressed up in public words. But then she remembered his eyes steady, unwavering, when he had looked at her. That wasn't pity. She knew what pity looked like. She had seen it enough in her life. This had been something else. Something harder to name. Still, The voices were louder than memory. That evening, when she finally left the office, she kept her head down, clutching her bag to her chest. Outside, the Boston air was cool, carrying the salt of the harbor. The city bustled around her, traffic lights blinking, horns blaring, footsteps rushing on the sidewalks. She blended into the crowd, but inside she felt exposed, like everyone could see the rumors clinging to her skin. She boarded the bus, slid into her usual window seat, and stared out at the skyline. The lights of the towers flickered against the darkening sky, beautiful and distant. She thought of all the people still inside those glass walls, whispering her name, twisting it into something ugly. For the first time, she wondered if she could keep doing this, if she could keep walking into that building each morning, knowing she was no longer invisible, no longer safe. As the bus rolled across the bridge, she pressed her forehead to the cool glass. She felt small, cornered, trapped in a story she hadn't chosen, and somewhere on the other side of town, in a penthouse office high above the city. Victoria Hayes sipped her evening glass of wine. She scrolled through her phone, smiling faintly as new whispers reached her inbox. "She's his girl," one message read. But for how long? Victoria tapped her nail against the rim of her glass. She didn't need to push too hard. The seed had already been planted. Now it would grow on its own, watered by gossip, fed by suspicion. And if Emily Carter thought being invisible had been hard, Victoria intended to show her just how brutal it could be to be seen. The restroom was the only place Emily Carter thought she might still be invisible. She slipped inside after another meeting, filled with stares and half smiles, the kind that weren't kind at all. She checked the stalls empty, then pushed into the farthest one and locked the door. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unflattering. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. She sat down on the closed toilet lid, folded her arms across her knees, and finally let herself break. Tears slid down her face, hot and relentless. She pressed her palms against her eyes, as if she could stop the flood, but it only made the sobs louder. Here, in this cramped stall, away from the glass walls and the polished floors, Emily could finally say what she never dared out loud. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm nothing. Maybe I was only ever the ugly secretary, the quiet one, the nobody who happened to sit in the right chair at the right time. She remembered the whispers sharp, unforgiving. She's his girl, but not the way he meant. She must be desperate. She must have done something to earn that kind of attention. Every word replayed in her head like a cruel recording. Emily clutched her stomach, the pain twisting from the inside out. For years, she had told herself that being invisible was safer, that if she kept her head down, no one could hurt her, but now she was no longer invisible, and somehow, that hurt even more. She whispered into the empty space, her voice hoarse. "I don't belong here. I never did." Her reflection in her mind was sharp and unkind, the crooked glasses, the worn clothes, the shoes that clicked too softly. She saw herself, as they saw her, a joke. For a fleeting moment, she wished Jonathan Reed had never spoken her name, because now she carried the weight of it. His words had pulled her into the light, and the light was blinding, unforgiving. She stayed there for nearly half an hour, until her breathing slowed, until the tears dried into streaks on her cheeks. When she finally stood, her knees trembled. She splashed cold water on her face, avoiding the mirror. She didn't want to see herself. Not today. Just as she was leaving, the door opened. One of the interns stepped in, startled to see her. "Oh, hi. Emily," the girl said quickly. Too quickly. Her eyes darted over Emily's blotchy face, then flicked away. Uncomfortable. "Sorry, I didn't know anyone was in here." Emily forced a nod, pushed past her, and left before the girl could say more. Out in the hallway, she moved fast, hoping the redness in her eyes wouldn't betray her. She returned to her desk, but even there, safety eluded her. The room fell quiet for a beat when she sat down. Then the low hum of whispers began again. She lowered her head and typed, her vision blurry. She told herself she could survive this. She had survived worse, but the truth gnawed at her. Survival wasn't living. Survival was hiding in bathroom stalls, wiping away tears no one cared about. Later that afternoon, Jonathan Reed noticed. From his office, he saw her desk empty for too long. He asked his assistant if she had left early, but the assistant shook her head. So, Jonathan walked the floor himself, his gaze sharp, scanning for her. When he passed the restroom, he caught the faint sound of a muffled sob. His chest tightened, but when he waited by the door, Emily never emerged. She had already slipped out, moving quickly down the hallway, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Emily," he called softly. She froze for a moment, then kept walking. Jonathan watched her retreating figure, the slope of her shoulders heavy with something he recognized all too well. Shame, loneliness, the kind of weight that could break a person if carried too long. He wanted to follow her, to stop her, to say something, anything that might take the sting away. But he didn't. Not yet, because he could see in her posture, in the speed of her steps, that she wasn't ready, and Emily, for her part, felt the heat of his gaze on her back. It only made her walk faster. She couldn't face him. Not now, not when she felt like a fraud, not when every whisper in the building told her she didn't deserve his defense. In her mind, Jonathan's words twisted into something crueler than they had ever been meant to be. She's my girl. What if they were wrong? What if he hadn't meant respect, but pity? What if he had said it just to silence the room? Nothing more. The questions chewed at her as she returned to her desk, sat down, and buried herself in work she could barely see. Around her, the office buzzed with the ordinary rhythm of business. Phones rang, keys clacked, laughter drifted from the break room. But for Emily Carter, the world had shrunk to a single truth. She had never felt more alone. The Human Resources conference room was nothing like the sleek boardroom on the top floor. There were no skyline views, no polished mahogany table, just beige walls, fluorescent lights, and a round table that seemed too small for the weight of the conversations it held. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper files, as if the room itself had been exhausted by years of quiet accusations. Emily Carter sat at one end, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her palms were damp, her throat dry. She tried to sit tall, but her shoulders betrayed her, slumping under an invisible weight. Across from her, two HR representatives adjusted their laptops. Ms. Keller, middle-aged with clipped words and a sharp gaze, led the inquiry. Beside her sat Jonah, younger, less certain, eyes darting between the screen and Emily's face. Jonathan Reed sat to Emily's left, calm but unreadable. His presence should have steadied her, but instead it only deepened the tension, because if the rumors were poison, then his defense had been the spark that set them aflame. "Ms. Keller began, her voice smooth but heavy. "Ms. Carter, thank you for joining us. This is a standard inquiry. Nothing has been decided. We're simply following up on a concern raised by an anonymous staff member." Concern. The word felt like a mask, polite and sterile, hiding the sting of what it really was, an accusation. Emily nodded faintly. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I understand, Ms." Keller tapped a few keys. "The concern involves the possibility of an inappropriate relationship between yourself and Mr. Reed." Emily's chest tightened. Hearing it spoken aloud made the whispers heavier, more real. She gripped her hands tighter in her lap. "I don't have a relationship with Mr. Reed," she said quickly, almost desperately. "Not like that, Ms." Keller tilted her head, not unkind but not believing either. "Can you explain then why during the last executive meeting, Mr. Reed made a public declaration? She glanced at her notes that you were his girl." Emily's face burned. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "He was defending me. People were unkind. He wanted them to stop." Jonah leaned forward, his tone softer. "And to be clear, you've never received special treatment from Mr. Reed." "No," Emily said, firmer this time. "I do my work. I've always done my work. I never asked him for anything." But even as the words left her mouth, She saw their eyes the subtle doubt, the suspicion that lingered no matter what she said. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Emily Carter is one of the most dedicated employees in this company. My words were a defense of her professionalism, not evidence of misconduct. Ms. Keller didn't flinch. With respect, Mr. Reed, the perception within the company tells a different story. We've received multiple reports of staff questioning whether favoritism is at play. Perception is not reality," Jonathan replied, his jaw tight. "Perhaps not," Ms. Keller said calmly. "But perception influences culture, and culture matters." Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her. Culture, perception, words that made her existence sound like a liability. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "If I dressed differently, if I wore makeup, if I looked more like everyone else, would anyone care about that photo? About what he said?" The question hung heavy. Jonah shifted in his chair. "Ms. Keller cleared her throat but didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. Emily stood abruptly, the chair scraping back against the carpet. "I didn't ask him to stand up for me. I never even spoke to him before that meeting. But he was the only person who saw what was happening. He was the only one who didn't look away." Her words cracked, carrying more truth than polish. Silence followed. "Ms. Keller finally closed her laptop with a quiet snap. "That will be all for now. Ms. Carter, we'll notify you if further steps are necessary." Emily nodded once, her chest hollow, and walked out. The hallway outside felt colder. The glass walls reflected her image back at her, small, rumpled, fragile. She hated it. Jonathan caught up with her. "Emily," but she shook her head, quick, desperate. "Don't, please." Her voice broke. She kept walking, refusing to look at him. Because if she looked, she might see the one thing she couldn't bear: pity. For the rest of the day, Emily moved like a ghost. She answered emails, delivered files, refilled coffee pods, but it was all mechanical. Her mind somewhere far away. She had thought invisibility was cruel, but this being doubted, being questioned, being treated like a problem to be managed was worse. For the first time, she realized something she hadn't let herself believe until now. There was no fairness here, no system designed to protect her. The company didn't want the truth. It wanted convenience. It wanted silence. And in that silence, Emily Carter stood completely, unbearably alone. The office was nearly empty by the time Jonathan Reed found her. Most employees had already left, their chatter and footsteps fading into the night. The building hummed with a different kind of silence now. The low buzz of lights, the distant whir of cleaning equipment. Emily Carter sat alone at her desk, head bent over a stack of folders. The glow from her computer screen made her look even more fragile, like a figure carved from glass. Jonathan paused in the doorway, watching for a moment. He could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her shoulders curled inward as though she was bracing herself against an invisible storm. "Emily," he said softly. She startled, looking up quickly. "Mr. Reed, I was just finishing these reports." "Leave them," he interrupted gently. "Come with me." She hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to escape into work the way she always did. But something in his tone, steady, unyielding, made it impossible. She rose slowly, following him down the quiet hallway. He led her to his office. It felt different at night. Without the usual stream of executives and assistants, the room was stripped of its power plays. The city skyline stretched wide beyond the glass, Boston's lights flickering like stars too close to touch. Jonathan closed the door behind them. He didn't sit at his desk. Instead, he stood near the window, his hands tucked loosely into his pockets. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, waiting. Finally, Jonathan turned, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Do you know why I defended you?" he asked. Emily swallowed. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Because you felt sorry for me. His jaw tightened. No. He stepped closer. Because I know what it's like to be left standing alone. She frowned, unsure what he meant. He exhaled slowly, as if the words carried weight he hadn't lifted in years. When I was younger before this company became what it is, I cared about someone. She worked here. Quiet like you, smart, dedicated. But she didn't fit the mold. People underestimated her, mocked her. And when the pressure grew too much, she broke. Emily's chest tightened. Jonathan looked past her for a moment, as though he could still see the ghost of that memory in the room. No one stood up for her. Not even me. I was too afraid of the fallout, too concerned with protecting what I was building. And because of that, she left. She walked away from everything. From me. He paused, his voice dropping lower. I've carried that with me ever since. The regret of silence. The cost of cowardice. Emily stared at him, her breath caught. She had never imagined Jonathan Reed powerful, untouchable Jonathan Reed speaking with such rawness. He met her eyes again, steady now. So, when I saw what was happening to you, when I heard the laughter, the whispers, I couldn't stay silent, not this time. Her throat tightened. Words hovered at the edge, but refused to come. Jonathan took another step closer, close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the human side of the man who ruled entire boardrooms. No one stood up for me once, he said quietly, and I won't let it happen again. Something shifted inside her then, fragile but undeniable. For so long, she had believed her struggle was hers alone, that no one could understand the suffocating weight of being dismissed, diminished, erased. Yet here was a man who had built an empire, admitting he carried a wound not so different from her own. Tears pricked her eyes. She looked away quickly, embarrassed. I don't know if I'm strong enough for all this, she whispered. You already are, Jonathan said firmly. You keep showing up. You keep working. That takes more strength than they'll ever understand. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, of unspoken understanding. For the first time in days, Emily felt a strange kind of relief, not because the storm outside had calmed it, hadn't, but because, at last, someone else stood inside it with her. She nodded faintly, her voice trembling. Thank you. Jonathan's expression softened. Just slightly. You don't have to thank me. Emily, just don't disappear. That's all I ask. She met his gaze again, and in that look, fragile but certain, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something quieter, deeper, a thread of empathy, a seed of trust. And though the world outside that office still burned with rumors and doubt, inside these walls, for a fleeting moment, Emily Carter didn't feel so alone. It started with a single post. Late one evening, while Emily Carter sat at her small apartment table, finishing leftover soup and trying not to think about the day, someone else was busy uploading her humiliation. The photo was simple, almost ordinary Jonathan Reed standing beside her chair in the executive boardroom, his hand resting lightly on the back of her seat, his body angled protectively toward her, her face, caught mid-blink, looked startled, vulnerable, but the caption changed everything. Sleeping with the boss, or just lucky insiders say this is the reason behind her sudden rise. Within minutes, the post gained traction, a few retweets, a handful of comments. By midnight, it had crossed into the wider web. By morning, it was everywhere. Business gossip blogs ran with it. Twitter threads dissected every pixel. Instagram accounts posted memes with mocking hashtags. Even LinkedIn, usually a place of professional polish, buzzed with veiled commentary about ethics and leadership. Emily woke to a phone buzzing non-stop. Dozens of notifications, messages from numbers she didn't know, emails flooding her inbox. At first, she didn't understand. She opened one link, then another. Her stomach turned to ice. There she was, her face, her name splashed across screens from Boston to California. Some comments were blunt, classic, ugly secretary makes good guess we know how. She must be amazing at something behind closed doors. Others were crueler, wrapped in sarcasm. Proof you don't need talent, just the right desk chair. Who knew loyalty cards for thrift stores came with CEOs attached? The memes were worse. One showed a stock photo of a maid beside a rich man in a suit, captioned Emily Carter, operations specialist. Another edited her face onto Cinderella scrubbing the floors, except the prince was Jonathan Reed, and the fairy tale was poisoned with scorn. The speed was dizzying. By noon, the hashtag, or CEO's girl, was trending nationally. Her phone buzzed again and again, notifications she couldn't silence fast enough. Old acquaintances from college sent awkward texts. Strangers filled her inbox with insults, some with threats. Emily set her phone face down on the table, but it didn't stop the noise inside her head. They've taken me apart, she thought, piece by piece, and I can't stop it. She tried to eat but couldn't swallow, tried to work on her laptop but couldn't focus. Everywhere she looked, her reflection stared back in some distorted, mocking form. The city outside carried on traffic rumbling, children shouting on sidewalks, neighbors laughing in the apartment below. But for Emily, the world had narrowed to the four walls of her kitchen and the roar of voices she couldn't silence. By evening, the storm had reached television. A business news anchor smirked as he introduced a segment. Boston's Reed Technologies is under fire tonight after a viral photo suggests the CEO may have blurred the lines between personal and professional. The screen showed the photo again, cropped tighter now, exaggerating the closeness between Emily and Jonathan. She shut the TV off, her hands shaking. The tears came, then not sharp. Cleansing tears, but heavy ones, dragging her down. She curled up on the couch, burying her face in the old throw pillow she had carried since college. Her chest heaved, but her eyes grew dry too quickly. The tears replaced by something worse. Numbness. It was as if her heart had packed a bag and left, unwilling to feel anymore. Her mind replayed every cruel comment until the words blurred together. Ugly, pathetic, desperate, nothing. Hours passed like that, Emily motionless, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound anchoring her to reality. At some point, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. She couldn't bear to see her name anymore. She thought of Jonathan, his steady gaze, his quiet words, the way he had said, "She's my girl," as if it was truth, not performance. But now, with the entire nation laughing, she wondered if even he could undo this storm. Her voice cracked in the dark apartment. "I can't survive this." And for the first time since the whispers began, Emily didn't just feel invisible, she felt erased. The storm outside hadn't quieted. If anything, it had grown louder. 2 days had passed since the photo went viral, and Emily Carter still couldn't bring herself to step back into the Reed Technologies tower. She called in sick, though sick felt too small a word for the hollow ache in her chest. Her apartment had become a cage. The blinds stayed half closed. Her phone sat face down on the table, buzzing endlessly, a pulse she couldn't escape. She moved from couch to chair to bed, but the weight followed her everywhere. She had cried until there were no tears left. She had screamed into pillows, paced the small living room, pressed her hands against her face until her skin burned. Nothing silenced the voices, and yet, by the third night, something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something quieter, almost fragile, a small ember that refused to die. If I stay silent, they win. If I let them write my story, they'll never stop. She remembered Jonathan's words in the darkened office. "Don't disappear." She thought of all the women in the hallways who had turned away when she passed, the interns who giggled behind their hands, the managers who had let cruelty slide because it wasn't their problem. And then she thought of the girls she used to be, the college student who hid in the back of lecture halls, the teenager who pretended not to hear when classmates called her names, The child who sat at the dinner table while relatives whispered she was plain. Her whole life, she had let silence be her armor, but armor could also be a prison. That night, Emily made a choice. She dug her old laptop out from under a stack of papers. The camera lens had a tiny crack in the corner, but it would have to do. She pulled her hair into a simple knot, then let it fall loose again. No makeup, no polish, just herself. She set the laptop on the kitchen table, angled the screen, and pressed record. At first, no words came. Her throat closed, her palms damp. She reached to stop the recording, then forced herself to stay. "Hi," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My name is Emily Carter." Her reflection on the screen looked back at her, fragile but steadying. "I didn't want to make this video. I never asked to be known. I never wanted attention. But someone took a moment out of context and turned it into a story I don't recognize. A story that's not mine." Her breath hitched. She pressed on. "So, let me tell you who I am. I'm 32. I work as a secretary. I don't wear fancy clothes. And I don't wear much makeup. I walk quietly because, for most of my life, it felt safer not to be seen." She paused, her eyes shining. "But I am not invisible." The words surprised her even as they left her mouth. They steadied her. "I show up every day. I stay late. I fix mistakes that no one else wants to claim. I work because I believe in building something good, even if no one notices. And yes, my boss defended me in a meeting. Not because I begged him to, not because I earned it in some secret way, but because he saw what everyone else ignored, that I'm more than their whispers." Her hands trembled, but her voice grew stronger. "For every woman who has been laughed at in the break room, for every girl who's been told to change herself to be taken seriously, for every person who's ever been called ugly just because they dared to be different, I see you. And I'm not ashamed anymore." She leaned closer, her voice quiet but fierce. "My name is Emily Carter, and I am not invisible." She clicked stop. For a long moment, she sat frozen, staring at the black screen. The silence pressed in. Fear rose in her chest, sharp and urgent. What if they laugh harder? What if I just handed them more ammunition? But another voice whispered back, "Steady now. What if someone hears you, really hears you?" With shaking hands, Emily uploaded the video. No music, no filters, no edits, just her. And then she waited. The first hour passed slowly. A handful of views, a few likes, one comment. "Thank you, this hit me hard." By noon the next day, it had crossed 50,000 views. By evening, 300,000. The comments poured in, not with cruelty this time, but with gratitude. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way. I'm a teacher, and I've been mocked for how I look. You gave me courage. Whoever tried to silence you just made you louder. Thank you." Emily, the hashtag that once mocked her, Orsh CEO's girl, faded. A new one took its place. "I am not invisible." It spread like wildfire. Women shared their own stories, from high school bullying to workplace discrimination. Men, too, wrote messages of support, admitting they had overlooked people like Emily for too long. The same platforms that had mocked her now amplified her voice. In her apartment, Emily sat in stunned silence as the numbers climbed, her laptop glowing in the dark. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the beat of her heart steady now, not frantic. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel erased. She didn't feel like a joke. She felt real. The storm wasn't over. She knew that. The whispers at work wouldn't vanish overnight, but something inside her had shifted forever. She had spoken. She had taken back her story. And this time, the world had listened. The Monday morning after Emily's video went live felt strangely different. The Reed Technologies tower looked the same from the outside, gleaming glass, polished steel, commuters rushing in with coffee cups and briefcases. But once Emily stepped through the rotating doors, she sensed it immediately. The air had changed. The same hallways that once echoed with whispers now carried a softer hum. The glances were still there, but not the same as before. They weren't laced with mockery. Some were cautious, some were curious, a few even carried respect. As Emily walked toward the elevators, two interns who had once giggled at her fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, one of them offered a small nod. Not pity, not mockery, just acknowledgement. On the 12th floor, where her desk sat tucked in a corner, the shift grew clearer. A designer she barely knew stopped by and said quietly, "I saw your video. It meant something. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." He didn't linger. He just left the words behind like an offering. Later that morning, a project manager who had often ignored her presence paused near her chair. She didn't apologize, but her voice was gentler when she asked Emily to review a report. It wasn't friendship, but it was no longer cruelty either. Of course, not everyone changed. Some colleagues still avoided her, unsure of what to say. Others exchanged quick, skeptical glances when she passed. And then there was Victoria Hayes. Victoria's office, with its glass walls and spotless white desk, had once been a throne. She thrived on being the center of attention, on orchestrating the jokes that kept Emily in the shadows. But now, those same glass walls felt like a cage. She watched as people stopped by Emily's desk not laughing, but listening. She saw how the hashtag had reshaped the narrative, how the company Slack channels buzzed with cautious admiration instead of cruel memes. It infuriated her. To Victoria, Emily wasn't a symbol of resilience. She was a threat. That afternoon, Victoria slammed her laptop shut so hard that the pen on her desk rattled onto the floor. She paced the length of her office, heels clicking against the polished floor, her reflection scowling back from the glass. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath. If the video had earned Emily's sympathy, then sympathy had to be destroyed. And if the world wanted a scandal, Victoria would give them one, manufactured or not. By midweek, she had already set a plan in motion. Through a contact in IT, she hinted about needing old chat logs for a project. She didn't say which project. She didn't need to. A few carefully chosen words, a well-placed bribe, and doors began to open. She wasn't after the truth. The truth wasn't useful. She wanted fragments, half-sentences, screenshots that could be twisted into something damning, something that would make Emily Carter's new voice crack under pressure. Back on the main floor, Emily felt the difference each hour. Her steps grew a little steadier. She still kept her outfit simple, an old blouse, her scuffed shoes, but she no longer walked with her head bowed. During lunch, Claire from the executive office stopped by with a quiet smile and invited Emily to sit at her table. It was a small gesture, but to Emily, it felt monumental. For the first time, she wasn't eating alone. Yet, beneath the fragile calm, Emily sensed a current, a waiting silence, as though not everyone had accepted her transformation. She caught Victoria's gaze through the glass office once, sharp as a knife. The look said clearly, "This isn't finished." Emily sat back at her desk, trying to focus on her work, but a chill lingered. She had faced the storm of social media and survived. But storms, she knew, often returned stronger, and somewhere, beyond her reach. Victoria was already stirring the clouds. Emily Carter had avoided Victoria Hayes for weeks. She had learned to keep her head down, to walk quickly past that glass office where Victoria always sat like a queen in her tower. But on Thursday afternoon, after whispers of new evidence began to spread around the office, Emily knew she couldn't keep avoiding. If Victoria was going to come for her again, she wouldn't run. Not this time. With her heart pounding, but her shoulders steady, Emily walked across the 12th floor and stopped outside the glass walls. She knocked once, then pushed the door open before Victoria could respond. Victoria looked up from her laptop, a faint smirk curling on her lips. Well, the internet's sweetheart. What brings you here? Emily. Looking for style tips. Emily stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her voice was calm, low but firm. No. I'm here because I'm done letting you write my story. Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Your story. Honey, no one cares about your story. They care about the scandal, the photo, the rumors. That's what makes headlines. That's what makes you matter. Emily's hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. You're wrong. What makes me matter isn't gossip. It's that I kept showing up, even when you tried to break me. Victoria's smirk faltered, just slightly. Cute speech, but it won't change what's coming next. Emily's chest tightened. The forged messages, the half-truths. You think I don't know you've been planning it since the day my video went live? For the first time, Victoria's eyes flickered. Careful, she said softly. Accusations like that could cost you your job. Emily took a step closer, her voice stronger now. I've spent years being careful. Careful not to speak, not to stand out, not to make waves. But being careful only protected you, not me. And I'm finished with silence. The room seemed smaller now, the air sharper. Emily could feel her own heartbeat, but she didn't back down. You wanted me invisible, she said, because people like me scare you. We don't play your game. We don't need to tear others down to rise. And that makes you furious, doesn't it? Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her voice was a hiss. You think you've won just because of one sappy video. You're nothing. Emily, a secretary in secondhand clothes. Do you really believe Jonathan Reed cares about you? You're a charity project, a distraction. And when I show them the messages, when I show them proof, you'll be finished. Emily's voice didn't waver. No, Victoria, when you show them lies, you'll be finished. At that moment, the office door opened. Both women turned. Jonathan Reed stood in the doorway, calm as ever, a folder in his hand. Claire followed behind him, her face unreadable. Actually, Jonathan said, his voice like steel. She's right. Victoria blinked. What Jonathan stepped inside, laying the folder on the spotless white desk. These are the server access logs from last week. Every download, every export, every anonymous upload. Funny thing, we traced them back to one account. He slid the paper across the desk. Yours. Victoria's face drained of color. She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. You can't be serious. Anyone could have Claire cut her off. No. The credentials used were unique to your machine. You leaked the private messages, you manipulated them, and then you sent them anonymously. The trail is clear. Emily stood silently, her pulse racing. As Jonathan's gaze locked on Victoria, his voice was calm, but every word struck like a hammer. You tried to destroy an employee's reputation. You jeopardized this company's integrity, and you turned a workplace into a weapon. He paused, his eyes narrowing. That ends today. Victoria's mask finally cracked. Her hands shook as she tried to gather her things. You can't do this. You need me. I built half of the marketing strategy that keeps this company afloat. Without me, Jonathan cut her off, his tone razor sharp. We don't need poison. Security will escort you out. At the door. Claire had already made the call. 2 guards appeared, quiet but firm. Victoria's eyes burned as she turned toward Emily, one last time. Her voice dripped venom. You think this makes you strong? You think he'll keep protecting you? You'll fall, Emily, and when you do, you'll fall harder than anyone. Emily didn't flinch. She held Victoria's gaze and spoke clearly, her voice steady. No, I'll rise because I'm not standing on anyone else. That's the difference between us. The guards guided Victoria out. The door shut behind her with a soft, final click. For a long moment, the office was silent. Emily's knees threatened to give way, but she steadied herself. Jonathan looked at her, his expression softer now. You didn't back down. Emily exhaled slowly. For the first time in my life, I didn't. Jonathan nodded once, then turned toward the glass wall where the entire floor had quietly stopped to watch. He tapped the desk once, signaling them back to work. The spell broke. Conversations resumed, Keyboards clicked, but the shift was unmistakable. Emily Carter was no longer invisible, and Victoria Hayes, the Queen of Whispers, was gone. For weeks, Emily Carter had lived in survival mode, dodging whispers, shrinking into corners, waiting for storms to pass. But when Victoria Hayes was escorted out of Reed Technologies, something inside Emily shifted permanently. The air felt lighter. The hallways didn't seem so hostile. For the first time in years, she could breathe without bracing for cruelty. But Emily didn't mistake relief for arrival. She knew she wasn't finished. One morning, Jonathan Reed summoned her to the top floor. His office overlooked the Boston skyline, the winter sun casting long beams across the glass and steel. He stood by the window, his hands folded behind his back. As she entered, "Emily," he said, turning to face her. His expression wasn't stern, but it wasn't casual either. "I have something for you." She waited, uncertain. He handed her a folder. Inside, neatly typed on the company letterhead, was a proposal project lead, internal culture initiative. Emily blinked. Culture, initiative. Jonathan nodded. "The board wants to rebuild trust after everything that happened. We need someone who understands what it feels like to be unseen, overlooked, someone who knows the cost of silence." I told them there was only one person for the job. Her chest tightened. She traced the words on the page as if they might vanish. "Me? Yes," he said simply. "You." Her first instinct was to shrink back, to say she wasn't ready, that she was just a secretary who wore secondhand shoes. But another voice rose inside her, the one that had spoken in her video, the one that had stared Victoria down. "You are not invisible." She nodded, her voice steady. "I'll do it." The following week, Emily walked into the executive boardroom, not as a shadow in the corner, but as the appointed lead of a new project. The room looked the same, long mahogany table, sleek chairs, the hum of city life beyond the glass walls. But everything felt different. For the first time, she wasn't clutching files as armor. She wasn't slipping into a seat hoping no one noticed. She wore a navy dress, simple, second-hand, but pressed carefully, and she walked with her shoulders back. The board members looked at her as she entered, some curious, some skeptical, but none dismissive. Jonathan motioned for her to take a seat near the center, not the margins. Emily sat, unfolded her notes, and began to speak. Her voice trembled at first. Old habits were hard to break. But as she continued describing initiatives for workplace respect, mentoring programs for interns, policies to address harassment, the tremble faded. The words poured out not like a performance, but like truth. She spoke of what it meant to feel erased, of how silence corrodes dignity, of how every company is only as strong as the people it refuses to overlook. For once, no one interrupted, no one laughed, they listened. When she finished, the room was quiet, not with judgment, but with weight. Then one of the older board members leaned forward. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone thoughtful. "I've sat through hundreds of presentations. Few have felt as necessary as this one. Well done." Emily exhaled, the knot in her chest loosening. She glanced at Jonathan. He gave a single nod, not of rescue, but of respect. That evening, back at her desk, Emily felt the shift fully. Colleagues stopped to congratulate her, not with hollow words, but with sincerity. An intern shyly approached and said, "I saw your video. You're the reason I didn't quit." Emily smiled, her heart swelling. It wasn't about titles or promotions. It wasn't about proving her worth to people who had once mocked her. It was about becoming what she had needed all along, a voice, steady and unafraid, in a room that once silenced her. For the first time, Emily didn't feel like she was surviving. She was leading. And the girl who once hid behind cracked glasses and worn shoes now carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had walked through fire and risen higher. The city outside the Reed Technologies tower had gone quiet for the night. Boston's winter sky glowed faintly with the reflection of streetlights on snow. The streets below hushed, except for the occasional hum of a passing car. Emily Carter lingered in the conference room long after the last board member had left. Papers were stacked neatly, her notes tucked away, but she couldn't bring herself to leave just yet. For years, she had walked these halls as a shadow. Now, she had sat at the center of the table, and people had listened, truly listened. The memory still hummed inside her like a gentle song. A soft knock pulled her from her thoughts. The door opened, and Jonathan Reed stepped in. He had shed his blazer, his white shirt sleeves rolled neatly at the forearm. He looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like the man who had once leaned down in a crowded meeting room and said, "She's my girl." "Still here?" he asked, his voice calm but warm. Emily smiled faintly. "I guess I didn't want the day to end." He crossed the room and sat across from her, not at the head of the table, but beside her, as if to remind her they were equals in this moment. "You did well today," he said. "More than well. You carried the room." She lowered her gaze. "I almost couldn't breathe when I started." "But you stayed," he said firmly. "And then you spoke. And when you spoke, no one could look away." The words settled deep. For so long, she had doubted every syllable that left her mouth. To hear him say it now felt like someone had returned a part of herself she thought was gone forever. For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, but full. Finally, Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her. His voice softened, losing its edge of command. "I believed in you before the world did." Emily's breath caught. She looked at him, not with fear, but with something steady, grateful. She thought of all the moments he could have turned away, all the times it would have been easier for him to let her remain invisible. But he hadn't. "And now," she said quietly, her voice stronger than she expected, "I believe in myself." For both of them, it was the truest thing spoken all evening. Jonathan's expression shifted just slightly, but enough for Emily to see a weight lift from him, too. Perhaps he carried his own ghosts the times he hadn't spoken, the people he hadn't defended. Maybe believing in her had been his way of believing in himself again. Neither of them tried to name it. They didn't need to. They simply sat together in the stillness of the empty room. Two people who had walked through fire in different ways, now meeting in its quiet afterglow. Emily gathered her papers slowly, tucking them into her worn leather bag. She stood, and Jonathan rose with her. At the doorway, she hesitated, glancing back at the table where she had once sat in silence, afraid of her own voice. Tonight, that table had heard her truth. Jonathan followed her gaze. "The room feels different now, doesn't it?" She nodded. "It does." Then, with a small smile, she added, "Or maybe it's just me." They left together, not side by side as CEO and secretary, but as two people bound by something deeper than titles. The city lights greeted them through the glass lobby as they stepped outside, the cold air biting but clean. Emily pulled her coat tighter, but for the first time, the winter didn't feel so heavy, because she carried warmth within her now belief, not borrowed from anyone else, but her own. The city was waking up. Emily Carter stood in the lobby of Reed Technologies, her bag over her shoulder, her breath visible in the crisp Boston air that seeped in each time the revolving door spun. It was too early for most employees to have arrived, but she had grown fond of these quiet moments. For years, the building had felt like a fortress she had to sneak into, head down, praying no one noticed her. Today, as she stepped toward the glass doors, it felt like something else entirely, a threshold. Outside, the sun was rising, pale gold spilling across the skyline. The wind moved through the streets with a gentle hum, lifting the edges of Emily's hair. She paused on the steps, tilting her face upward. For once, she didn't rush. Her hand slipped into her coat pocket. She pulled out the old name tag she had kept tucked away, a thin plastic rectangle, the ribbon frayed and torn from years of wear. She remembered taping it together more than once, hiding its shabby state from curious eyes. Back then, it had been her shield, proof she belonged in the building, even if no one wanted to admit it. Now, as she looked at it in her palm, She realized she didn't need it anymore. With a small, steady breath, Emily unclipped the ribbon, letting the torn fabric fall away. She held the tag up once more, then placed it gently on the ledge of the steps, not discarded in shame, but left behind as a marker of the woman she had once been. A woman who hid. A woman who whispered apologies for existing. A woman who believed invisibility was safety. She smiled a quiet, genuine smile and stepped into the sunlight. The wind brushed her face, cool and freeing. It carried no whispers now, only space. Space for her voice, her presence, her story. She thought of everything that had happened, the mockery, the lies, the humiliation, the storm that nearly drowned her, and she thought of how she had stood up anyway, trembling but unbroken, until her voice carried farther than she ever imagined. She remembered her own words in the video. I am not invisible, and now she knew the truth in them fully. Because invisibility had never been about her appearance, or her clothes, or her quiet nature. It had been about the weight of silence and her decision to carry it. She spoke softly into the morning air, as if the city itself might need to hear it. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means saving your voice for the moment that matters. The words lingered in the breeze, steady and sure. Emily walked forward then, her steps confident on the stone pavement. She didn't know what the future held: new challenges, new battles, new storms, but she no longer feared them, because she had discovered something stronger than approval. She had discovered herself, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. That evening, as the video of her final message played across millions of screens, a narrator's voice carried her story outward, soft yet insistent. Have you ever felt invisible? What would you say if the world was finally listening? The question hung there, not as a challenge, but as an invitation for every listener to step out of their own silence. And somewhere, in homes and offices, in classrooms and kitchens, people paused, some with tears in their eyes, some with a spark in their chest, because maybe, just maybe, they had been saving their voices too, waiting for the moment that mattered. And now, because of Emily Carter, they believed that moment could come. Emily's journey reminds us that silence does not erase worth. For years, she believed blending into the background was the safest way to survive. Many of us know that, feeling the fear of being judged, ridiculed, or dismissed for simply existing as we are. But her story shows that even the quietest among us carry strength, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The cruel laughter of others can wound, but it cannot define us. What defines us is the courage to stand, even with trembling hands, and say, I am not invisible. Emily's courage became more than her own. It became a light for others who had hidden in silence too long. In our later years, we often reflect on what we could have said or done differently. Emily's story is a gentle reminder it is never too late to find your voice. And when you do, it may not only free you, it may inspire someone else to rise as well. So ask yourself, what truth have you been saving inside? Perhaps today is the moment that matters. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing in Emily's journey. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need the reminder, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can keep spreading light where it's needed most.